For our second report, we do have Dr. Lyle Alshai here to review the information he's gathered from my evaluation, from the surveys that were sent out, and to report to you all what he's found out.
All right. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Before I start, let me just say how much I enjoyed the recognitions. And that even goes along, if you remember, from those of you that were involved when I did this a couple of years ago. By the way, it doesn't seem like it's been 2 years, but I guess it has almost. That's one of the things that's a statement in the surveys. Most of them is about, are individuals and schools or departments recognized. And I don't remember this many recognitions when I was here before, so I commend you for doing that. I recognized a couple of names. Some of you know I was in Hawkins County at one time, many years ago. In fact, I spent the second most number of years of my career in Hawkins County, the most in Greenville City, but I was in Hawkins County 9 years as a teacher and principal. And I remember Chris Hughes when he was a student, and Dr. Bailey probably does too. So, and I recognize the names of one of those tutors, Kelly Markham. I'm assuming it's the same Kelly Markham. I don't know. So, pretty good people coming out of the gap sometimes, right? But let me just tell you how honored I am to be here, and I want to thank you, not just for this trip. I think I'm getting too far away from that time, but just for trusting me the first time I did this in a comprehensive manner, and then to ask me to come back and do what I call, it's not your term, but my term, an interim, sort of a mid-contract type thing. And obviously this evaluation doesn't include all the data that we did, as you know from what you asked me to do. But I think it is still useful. I really believe that. There's a lot of data points still in it. And I want to also thank, before I get into this, Ms. Michelle and Dr. Bailey. I know Ms. Peters, maybe others that I don't know about helped get me emails or information of various kinds. Thank Mr. Hixson for his time doing an interview with me and talking through some things. I only had about 9 follow-up questions, and I think we talked about an hour. I think he had to pull over on the highway somewhere, and I probably made him late somewhere, but it's the only time we could get our calendars together, I think. But I do thank you for trusting me with this process. I'm not sure how much detail you want me to go into. This is one of those things you can go as long and as deep as you want, but so I'm just going to try to hit a few points that I think might be relevant, and then if you have questions, I can always go deeper. I know you have other things on your agenda. I also want to thank the administrators and teachers and classified / support. I'm not sure which way you call them, but different systems call them different things. The parents and the community stakeholders, because it takes a little time to go through some of the surveys. Some of them are shorter, as you know, the community and parents and so forth, trying to make sure you get some participation. But some of them are a little longer, so I thank everyone that participated. If you would just start with me on page 3, the introduction. I'm obviously not going to read this, but I'm going to point out a few things. That first section is similar to what you may have seen before if you were on the board then. Just sort of lays the legal background for this, the state law and your board policies. It talks about evaluation. Then we get into the organization. And the main thing I would say there versus the next thing you will see on page 4, which is the measured components, is the organization piece. It talks about the different functions of a school system. Then when you get to the measured components, it is more of the how you accomplish those functions, if that makes sense. So you have one set of things in the organization, and briefly it talks about your instructional program, your people, your work environment, your business operations, and parent community engagement. Those are the big functions of a school district. And then when you get to those components, which is really where the surveys are designed, is how you achieve those things as a school system. Because as you know, or hopefully, the things that we look at in this evaluation is not just specific individual leadership characteristics, but it's the impact on the entire district of the director of schools. So if you think about those functions of a school district and then overlay those how pieces, which is the board relationship, the communication, here again, the instruction. And instruction in that sense is more of the strategies and support and the monitoring and the processes of instruction that makes the instructional program successful. That's why it's sort of listed in both categories. And then, of course, innovation and personal characteristics. I think I got all of them, but you can see them in there. Oh, leadership. A lot of things could be lumped in leadership, but I tried to pull out some things that were very specific to leadership. So I'm not going to go through those two sections specifically. I think you can read those, but hopefully that brief explanation makes sense. So one section, one set is the functions, the other is the how we make those functions successful, okay? Now, if we get into page 7, we'll start talking about the actual survey results, because keep in mind with this process, unlike the first one, there's no interviews that were done with any of you or central office or principals or anything like that. And I even came and observed a board member meeting or two, a couple of principals meetings, and that wasn't involved either. So those things aren't included. There was one new piece in communicating with Mr. Hixson early on. He said you did want to include this time the classified support staff group, which I had offered. And I've started, that's going to be a piece of everything going forward. You know, that's one of those things that you trusted me early on when I was developing this process, and I wanted to make sure it was manageable. And now that I have some other tools to work with, we can do more in that realm too. So that was actually a new piece this time. And we'll talk a little bit about the response rates and that sort of thing as we go through. But let's talk a little bit about this first section that starts on page 7, because in your case, you might want to argue this is the most important section, right? Mr. Hixson's your employee, so what your opinions and views are the utmost, and after all, you also are the ears and eyes of the community, so hopefully you are the most informed stakeholder in terms of responding to these survey questions. And I would tell you, you can probably see, because there's a bonus added to this, right? I included the previous score. If you see that, I know you have some new board members, and plus probably the rest of you didn't want to pull out your old report, because I know how we are. We all want to go back and say, well, how did Mr. Hixson do the last time on this? So I put it right there for you, so you could see that and not have to go dig it out. I think what you will see very quickly is there is what I would think is a significant difference in this time and the last time in some of these scores. For instance, without going item by item, in that first section on board relationship, if you go down about 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth one, notice it was there's an open and positive relationship between the director of schools and board. Last time that was a 3.1. What is it this time? A 5, a perfect score. My goodness, that's a big difference. Big difference. And you'll see some similar jumps in some of those other, like the second one there about clear goals, 4.4 last time, but 4.9, which is almost a perfect score. There were several perfect 5.0s in this section, you'll see if you look in that far right-hand column. So I won't go through all of those improvements, but there's a big difference in this board relationship piece. I will tell you, I'll remind you here to keep in mind rather, when we get over to the administrator section, and please don't flip over there yet, but when we get to that, I think you're also going to see that the administrators in their responses recognize also that board relationship is stronger, and you will see that when we get there. So it's obvious, in other words, to other people. If you look there at communication, and I didn't say at the top of page 8, you'll see the board relationship average of all those items, and obviously I went from a 4.5 to 4.9. That's here again used. But let's look at communication. The lowest score there on this one is a 4.3, and there were like 3 perfect 5.0s, and there were also some significant increases there too. For instance, parent and community engagement is encouraged and supported from a 4.4 to a 4.9, and the director of schools aware of community views and opinions, which obviously is important, right? If you're going to be a leader, you've got to have your ear to the ground and understand what your community's thinking. A 4.0 to a 4.9. So, and then the overall communication average from a 4.4 to a 4.8. So, I won't dwell on a lot of those, but you can see what those improvements are. And I will point out if I miss any that you need to pay attention to, I hope. Going on to leadership, it's the lowest one in that section also is a 4.3. There's 3 more perfect scores there. The lowest one is about school facilities being well maintained. I will give you a hint. You will see that one again. You to really try to interpret that, I just report what I get, and I can't do a cause and effect, but you can probably read between the lines on some of these and make some assumptions probably. I will say that I thought it was the last one on page 8 there. Leadership growth and opportunities are provided for central office and school administrators. Notice that went up a half a point. That's important. Our administrators are just like teachers. They need to continue to be exposed to growth opportunities, and you believe that that's happening. If we go on over then to the next page, there's a couple more 5.0s, and then that overall average went from 4.6 to 4.8. Instruction is what we're all about, right? If we don't do anything else, we've got to get that one right. And here again, there were some pretty big jumps there in your opinions and what you're seeing Mr. Hixson do. And obviously a lot of that comes from reports like you heard tonight from Ms. Malone. And I noticed you gobbled her up from the core office at some point. I worked with her some myself, and you got a winner there. So smart. He didn't pass on. At least you can recognize talent, right? But it's all about instruction, and obviously you're getting those kinds of reports. Mr. Hixson and I talked about that in my interview with him, and the kinds of reports that you want, and his desire to provide you more regular reports in areas of instruction too. But you'll notice there's a few 5.0s in that section. Here again, there's some pretty good jumps. Like if you go down about midways, effective educator selection processes are in place, 4.3 to 5.0. I actually dug into that one a little bit with Mr. Hixson when I interviewed him, and I understand that there's more people involved, especially at the school level, and then I think that's important. And I won't go through these other than to say they're strong. I mean, they're very strong. I would tell you the very first one there means a lot to me, and I have my own biases as a past leader, but that defined autonomy is important. And I think that's where school board strategic plans and where performance objectives for your director of schools comes into play, because the autonomy is one thing, but if you just have autonomy without the defined part, what do you have? People are going everywhere, doing whatever they want, right? But that defined piece comes from your strategic plan, and it comes from the director of schools' performance objectives, because if he knows what the board expects, and based on your strategic plan, then it trickles down, right? Your principals know what that definition of success is. They're not just doing anything. they have freedom, but it's within, okay, we're after these objectives. And I just wanted to reiterate that one, and you should be proud, because at least in your opinion, 4.9, that's really strong and to be commendable. Okay, innovation, that's something that's more and more important, and I might be a little biased here too, because I worked in a rural system about half of my career, but I always thought in a rural system, you had to be more creative, because sometimes you don't have all the resources, right? So I think it's even more important. But notice there's some significant jumps there. The overall score for that category went from a 4.3 to 4.7. But even within that category, there were some strengths. I think also tied to the defined autonomy that I mentioned earlier, about the middle ways of that section. It talks about defined autonomy, but in a little bit different way in terms of, how principals use that again. And then personal characteristics. We all make decisions, live our lives, operate within our careers on a foundation of personal characteristics. And it drives how we make decisions, it drives how we treat other people, it drives a lot of how we go about interacting with communities, whatever it might be. And wow, almost perfect in the entire category. So not only should Mr. Hixson be commended, I think, for that, that's pretty much a model for me. I would like to think I was scored that highly on my own personal characteristics, because that's outstanding. And notice that was a significant jump in that category too from last time, from 4.5 to really a 5.0 with the rounding there, even though one of them was a 4.9. And then the overall board average went up from 4.5 to 4.8. So in terms of your opinions, your views of Mr. Hixson, some significant differences for whatever reason from the last time this was done. So then we go to administrators. The administrator categories are exactly the same as the boards, because they are the group that also works the closest with Mr. Hixson, except for the board, and maybe more so on a daily basis. So you'll see there that there are 18 out of 18 central office supervisors responded for 100%, and 27 out of 30 principals and assistant principals participating in the survey for 90%. That's great. The more we can get, obviously, the better. Board relationship, remember I said that, or gave you a hint earlier, that administrators noticed this about the relationship is better than it was 2 years ago. And if you look at the overall board relationship average, it went from a 4.4 to a 4.8. That's significant. So that tells me that yes, the administrators agree with your opinion that the relationship is strong. And I won't go through all of those since I talked about some of the examples in your section, but you will see the differences in the scores between last time and this time. Communication, the overall, if you look at page 12, the communication average is 4.7, which is exactly like last time. But if you'll notice, the school leader average went from 4.5 to 4.7. So here again, I try not to make too many judgments. It's hard not to sometimes, but it tells me Mr. Hixson's been here longer now. His principals have worked with him longer now. Maybe they understand better now than maybe they did 2 years ago, and some things are scoring slightly higher. The lowest one in that section was about the use of social media to communicate successes and system goals and that sort of thing, but even that was a 4.3. It's not like it was a low score. Leadership, the lowest score in that section, remember I said you would see it before, was on facilities. I don't know why, and it's not big, but there is a little bit lower overall score on facilities this time than last time, 4.1 last time, 3.9 this time. So that's just something I think to note, and you might see that again later in my report. There were several 4.9s, 4.8s, and so forth in this leadership section. And you'll notice the overall leadership score for that section that you'll see at the top of page 13 is just 1/10 higher than last time. But here again, the school leader average went up, and that's why that overall went up. Instruction, here again, it's where it all happens, right? It's that magic that happens in the classrooms each day. If you look down at the bottom of the overall instructional average there on page 13, it went from 4.4 to 4.5. It's not a big difference, but it is slightly better. Central office average and the school leader average both went up if you look at those divisions. The lowest one in that is the same as the lowest one last time, and it's that qualified substitute. Although it's slightly better this time, and I know from my interview with Mr. Hixson, you all have contracted with ESS, I think is what it is, as an outside source to try to improve it. So you are making those efforts, and it is slightly better. I'm going to move on unless you wave your hand here and have a question, since there's so much information. The innovation in this for administrators on page 14, the overall average there you'll see went from a 4.4 to 4.5, so not much, but it is slightly better. Didn't go down for sure, did it? That's what we want. The personal characteristics, if we get to that again, it almost mirrors what you had reported as a board, where you had almost a 5.0. This is a 4.9, so it's right there at it. So I think that's important. You have two groups of stakeholders, the board and your administrators, that work directly with Mr. Hixson constantly in some way, and both are responding in a very positive way in terms of personal characteristics. And I think we all know if we operate from that sound base, good things are going to happen because people feel like they're treated well and appreciated. The overall administrator average at the bottom of 14, that's across all the different sections of that administrator survey, just went up 1/10 of a point, so it's essentially the same. Then we get the teacher results. These look a little bit different than last time. I think I can explain a little bit of why. The last time our teacher pool 2 years ago was we only selected a certain number from each school. And if it was an elementary school, I don't remember, but I'm going to give you an example. This might not be the exact numbers. I didn't go back and look it up. But it was like 5 from each elementary, we'll say 10 from a middle school, and it was 15 or 20 from high school. So we pulled a section of parents. This time, we sent something to every parent in the district. So your sample size was much, much bigger. And you'll see there, I'm sorry, I'm going too fast, aren't I? Teacher, we'll get to parents in a minute then. But the teachers, there's 538 teachers and 240, that's 44.6%. And that's a good percentage. You know, you'd like to have as many as you want, but that's good. If we look at leadership, I think it's important that the very first one, I understand the goals of the school system. That says a lot, because if our employees, whether the teachers, support staff, or whoever, understand the goals, they know pretty much what the direction is of the system, and they know where they fall into it and what their work means in terms of those goals. The lowest one there, obviously, is about salary. It probably always will be. None of us are probably always happy with that. But I try to include that just because it may help you at some point, just to measure, the effects of anything that you do that may change, you hope, over time. Okay, so I wouldn't get too bent out of shape where it is now. It's what happens over time. Can you continue to make improvements and that go up? And I think that will will help, and you'll see that it has gone up slightly, not a great deal, but it has gone up. One that I think you'll see later in my report, perhaps at the end, is about midways there. And that is the one that says, I feel involved in decisions that affect the school system. When we look at the support staff survey, you will see a similar statement. It's worded a little differently. It's like, I feel involved with decisions in my department and our school, because with support staff, they could be in either one. And it was a similar response. So we'll talk about that one a little later. You'll see facilities there, again, is one of the lower ones, and that actually went down as well. For whatever reason, the facility question, not significantly, but it's dropped a little bit in all stakeholder categories so far. And then the instructional program provides adequate time for teacher collaboration. You'll notice that one has gone down. I will tell you now, in case I forget to say it later, and that is from the comments, because that's where I get a little more insight. It seems like it's not necessarily the time, is it being protected? You know, it's like, okay, there were comments made that said, okay, we've got time set aside, but so many times it's interrupted, like I keep hitting it. I'm pulled for an IEP, or maybe there's some training session that I'm being pulled for, or something at the district level, or what. So it's like, okay, there's this time set aside, but I rarely really get to use it. Now that's what the comments are saying. That's sort of a theme there. So you can take that, and Mr. Hixson can take it and dig into that a little bit more perhaps, and see if there's a little more understanding to it. The substitute teacher one there obviously is still low. It's slightly higher. Maybe it's because of the work that's being done to try to help in that area. The overall leadership average there, you'll notice, went down from a 4.0 to 3.8. 3.8 is close to the 4, and what is the 4? It's agree, right? 5 is strongly agree. So it's close to that agree. But I think that it's one of these areas where we don't want it to go any further. So there might be some things here between the board and Mr. Hixson that you might want to dig out and give a little more attention to. Personal characteristics, here again, not as high as the others, but still very high. I mean, the lowest one's a 4.3, and that's between that agree and strongly agree. So you should feel good about that, I think, because teachers don't work quite as closely with Mr. Hixson. They don't see him every day like some of you do, or the administrators. But the overall personal characteristics average there obviously is still a 4.5. And then you get to classified and support staff, and this was the one that I said was new that we did not do, so you don't have a previous score to compare this one to. But we sent surveys to 452 people, 112 responded. Now that's only a 24.8% response rate, not what we would want. However, my guess is you are like a lot of school systems where some of your support staff don't have emails or don't have the ability to check them every day, like some of your maintenance and bus drivers and maybe your teacher assistants. So I didn't expect the response rate to be really high. So this probably, in all consideration, is probably not bad, considering that some of these people probably don't have access to check their email on a regular basis. And then you can see the pay question is still a little lower, like it was on the teachers. And then if you look down about halfway again, remember I said you would probably see a similar question that says, I feel involved in decisions that affect my work. That's not a low score, a 3.7, but it's probably not where you'd like it to be. The overall leadership average there is a 4, if you look at the top of page 18. So it's still at that agree point. And this is the first time this group of stakeholders has been surveyed. Personal characteristics, the overall there is a 4.4. And here again, really strong. I thought it was interesting. I can only guess why, but if you look above the personal characteristics average, they're close to the bottom of page 18. You'll notice which one's the highest? The district-wide group, right? If you look right above the personal characteristics average that's in bold, the next line up, where I separate those different groups out, the district-wide ones are 4.8, which are a little higher than the others. My guess, and it's only a guess, is that here again, Mr. Hixson may have more contact with some of the district-wide folks than he would the school folks, and perhaps that could have an impact on how much they feel like they know about his work. Now, that's only a guess. Then the overall classified support staff average for this first time they've been looked at as 4.1. Then we get to the parents finally, when I started off on my tangent earlier. But like I said, we did all parents this time. Now, this was a tough one. I had several parent emails that bounced back, and you know how that is. People change emails a lot and that sort of thing. And they don't always let the school system know and so forth. But we tried. There were 2,437 parent emails sent out. So we tried to get them all, at least to give them an opportunity. And there's only 228 parents responding, and that's pretty low, right? 9.4%. I sure would have liked for that to have been higher, and we actually left that open, I'm going to say close to a month, and to try to give people as much time as possible. Right before I started analyzing that group, I tried to leave it open as long as we could. I think, though, the fact that we did reach out to all parents instead of a sample this time, it could be why you see some differences in the scores. Now, it could also be argued that since this was a larger sample size, maybe this score is a little more indicative. I don't know. It's, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but it's at least worth paying attention to. You'll notice that several of these scores did go down. Most of them not a great deal. But here's something else interesting that I at least want to make you aware of. I'm not saying that it makes all the difference, but I have noticed this in other evaluations that I have done. It's, the surveys are set up on a scale of 5, right? From strongly disagree to strongly agree. But almost always, so far, and it's not like I have thousands of these to look at, but it's almost like the parents are operating on a 4-point scale. Because even though these scores are lower, now there's not a perfect correlation, but if you look at the things that, even though they're lower, the things parents rated the highest are, for the most part, the things rated the highest by you and the administrators. Their overall score is lower, but their high points are still the same high points. Does that make sense? And I still don't know exactly what that means, but I've seen that before, and it is not a perfect correlation. But I think here is something to really take a look at, and some of my recommendations at the end will encompass this whole parent involvement engagement piece, just because I think it's worth taking a deeper look at. Then the personal characteristics there is 3.7 versus 4.1 the last time. But here again, if you look at the things that are higher, and if you think about if that was a 4-point scale, what would it look like? It would be close to that 4, wouldn't it? So I don't know. That's just one of those idiosyncrasies that I've been noticing. And then finally we get to the community survey. On page 20 there were 33 community members and 16 responded. That's a response rate of 48. So that's a good response there. And this is actually a few more community members than we had. I think we had 20-something last time. So we did up that a little bit, thankfully. Got a few more emails and so forth. And then you'll see what, or how they responded at the bottom of 20 and then going on to page 21. And you'll see they're extremely high, extremely high. So, and at least some of these, I'm not going to say all because I don't know all of them, but I think at least some of these are also business folks that are in somewhat regular contact and communication between Mr. Hixson, whether it's things going on in county government or things that involve the school system with business partnerships or whatever. So So here again, it's a group that I think, and those that provide me the emails could probably verify this or not, that it's people here again that seem to know Mr. Hixson, because what I find is the more someone knows a person, the scores tend to be a little higher, because you understand the base they're operating from, why decisions are made, etc. The lowest one on that is at the very top of 21, which is a 4.4, and that is still a very strong score, and that's the lowest one. You'll notice the overall leadership score there in that section is the same as last time, 4.7, and then the personal characteristics, here again, extremely strong, 4.9, and last time was 4.8. And the overall community across all the survey there, just those two sections, is still the same at 4.8. And then if you take all of the surveys and all the sections and do an overall average, you'll see there at the top of page 22, it only went down 1/10 of a point. So I really think if the parent piece had been higher, you'd have seen that go up from my analysis. All right, so let's talk briefly about the comments in the survey. This is what takes so long. As you can hear, you got to read through all of these. And even though this says 268, it's really 268 boxes of input. But within that box where they supply a comment on the surveys, most people provide more than one comment. So you have to read through, because it's an opportunity to say everything they want to say sometimes. So I would say that 268, if you look at actual number of comments, it's probably more like 400 or so actual comments to go through. And then to try to look at themes and then see if those themes match what the base survey said and that sort of thing. So out of those sections, they're on page 22, you'll see what I pulled from the comments only, okay? These strengths and positives are from the comments only, not the entire piece. You'll see that a little later. And I'm not going to read that whole piece there, or that whole list, but you'll notice it talks about the weekly communication. That's mentioned several times. People are very grateful to continue to receive that. Lots of comments about being a professional, moral, and ethical leader, as you would suspect by looking at those personal characteristics and responses. An advocate for teachers. That was actually mentioned several times, and it was obviously, from the teacher section. So I thought that was good. Several comments across the comment sections and various stakeholders about being an asset to the system. Kind, respectful, thoughtful, calm. I put all those together. You notice they're on page 23. And committed to Hawkins County. There were several people that were very complimentary of how Mr. Hixson had moved into this community and made his home and intended to stay here and was really invested in the system and the community. So I thought you need to know that as a board. There were several quotes, and believe it or not, I tried to narrow this list down, but there's still several. I tried to give you some examples there. I will not read through those. I'll just mention some of the themes, like the second one there is about leadership and being transformational for the district, and that his vision and integrity. If you go to the third one, in the very last sentence, it says, if I could grade Matt in the area of communication, it would be an A+. The fifth one, nothing but kind words, etc., etc. Number 7, Mr. Hixson is the epitome of dedicated leadership. You can go through these, and I tried to pull out some that were examples of those strengths that I gave you there. Now, if we look over on page 25, areas for growth, and here again, this is just from the comments. And I will also tell you, the threshold for me labeling it a theme from the comments was lower. In other words, there were things in the strengths that people mentioned 8 to 10 times. I mean, different people said, in other words, 8 to 10 times throughout that I pulled those. In some cases more than that. That's just an example. The surveys really were so good that I had to lower the threshold to 4 or 5 in some cases to pick the growth areas. I still feel like there are areas for growth, but what I'm telling you is probably none of these are like the big red burning flags of something but they are worth working on, and that's why I pulled them out. Like facilities, we've seen that in the comments and back in the survey. The substitute teacher piece, we've seen that, and it was in the comments. School teacher issues unresolved and follow-up. That one was, like I said, a somewhat low threshold, but it appeared enough that I thought this was something that Mr. Hixson could probably meet and talk with his administrators about, just to make sure that we do follow up with parents. After all, we are a public institution, and we need them as advocates, we need them as supporters, and one upset person can tell 5 more, right? So it's something to at least pay attention to. Visibility and focus on middle and high schools. That came from the comments, and there was a thing or two in the surveys that I probably didn't mention as we went through, but there was here again, this was not like a big red flag, somebody standing out and waving people down, but there was enough mention that I thought it was at least something that might need to be paid attention to. And then I've already mentioned the teacher planning and data analysis time. It showed up in the comments just like it did over in the survey. So probably most of these you would have suspected. Then I poured a few comments about these as well, just to give you some examples. All right, now we get to page 27, and these are my overall summary and recommendations. I will say, and it shows up there in the 3rd paragraph, about a set of performance objectives. I know we talked about that in the comprehensive evaluation a couple of years ago, and there was a section at the end of it that I gave some examples that could be used. I understand that that's still not fully in place, that you're working on it. I would just encourage you, and that is a recommendation you'll see in the other lists at the end too, to keep working on that. I think that will help you as a board know exactly what the progress is being made if you identify those specific goals, and it will also help Mr. Hixson and working with his administrators in knowing exactly what those goals need to be. I mean, you know generally every day what we're working on in a school system, but the specific goals and what they might be. And I'll say maybe just a bit more about that at the very end. I will say there in the the 5th paragraph, the larger paragraph toward the bottom, and I want to read this to you because I think it's important before we get into the list. Mr. Hixson continues to provide excellent leadership for Hawkins County Schools. Mr. Hixson is committed to the school system and community, and they benefit from his service. The responses of all stakeholder groups except parents rate Mr. Hixson's performance and personal characteristics highly. Parent responses are more mixed, and I'll skip the rest of that because it sort of goes without saying. And Mr. Hixson is encouraged to identify more and better ways of communicating with this vital stakeholder group, and progress in this area can lead to increased support and great advocates. Now, if we look at the strengths, you know, I almost felt like I needed to apologize to you as a board for such a long list, but literally there were many strengths, and it could be argued I could have added, you know, maybe more. But there is a long list of strengths. You know, it's not like I make this up. I just pull what the data tells me, and there are many wonderful things happening as a result of Mr. Hixson's leadership. And I want to stress that it's one thing to evaluate Mr. Hixson, but think about the impact he has on the district. And that's what we're all about. It's what's happening in those classrooms, like I said earlier. And you know, whether it's a shared vision, whether it's employees in the community understanding the goals of the school system, whether it's his positive relationship with the administrators, whether it's his leadership style, even the safety. You know, that's one of these things that's clearly a plus, and as Mr. Christian noted before the moment of silence, that's on all of our minds right now. whether we're parents or grandparents, aunts and uncles or whoever. That's the very first and most important thing parents think of every day when they send their children to school. The dignity and respect, exemplary personal characteristics. I mean, you could go on, and I just scanned that. Now, here's the areas for growth. I tell you, this is to some degree my opinion. It is based on data, but I'm human too, and there are always a few judgments you make when you look through data. I would encourage you to think about this and see if it makes sense to you and what you want to do with it. The first thing there is to continue efforts to raise teacher and classified support pay. You know, I think that's something you're naturally going to do, but that validates that work. And I put here, as you would suspect, that school facility and maintenance conditions are a growing concern. Obviously, it's not low yet, but that's the reason I use that term, growing concern. I think you want to stop that where it is, just so it doesn't go the other way. Efforts to provide adequate time for teacher planning, collaboration, and data analysis should be a priority. And the current time allotted for this, or allocated for this purpose, should be protected from other distractions. I think we owe that to our teachers to do that, and the teachers have a lot on them. Goodness gracious, they have a lot on them. There's an ongoing need regarding the pool of substitute teachers. We've talked about that throughout this. And I told you this one was coming. Decisions that impact teachers and classified and support staff should ensure that those employees are included in the process. They need a voice, they need to be heard. Not necessarily that they're going to make decisions, but if they're a part of the process, then they understand why decisions are made. New and expanded avenues to ensure two-way parent communication is needed. I think that when I went through that parent piece, and you know, with the parent survey, it's like some of the others. I grouped it into leadership and personal characteristics. And if you just look at that list under the leadership piece in that short parent survey, I think, might be wrong, but I think a lot of those things, the scores would have been higher if they just knew more. Now, I understand the challenges for getting some parents to want to know more, but I think it's our job to try to do what we can in all different ways that we can to involve and engage them. Processes and expectations for school principal teacher communication / follow-up with parents needed. And I alluded to that before. Some of it was just trying to read through the lines and comments, and some of it was actual comments that I really feel like there's, you know, and it's easy to do in any school system that we get wrapped up in our daily things and we just don't have time to make that phone call or respond to that email, and you know, we just have to take time to do it sometimes. And then I mentioned the performance objectives. And I really encourage the board to continue to work on those performance objectives. And I'll offer again, like I have some of you individually, if you want a third set of eyes, I'll be glad to look at them as a courtesy just to see if they're on track. But you know, you might think about those 5 functions at the beginning of this work, because those 5 functions of a school system, you know, about academics, about our people, about the learning environment, about our business operations and our parent engagement. If you look at those 5 big buckets, and even if you just came up with one performance objective for each, so you can make a long list if you wanted to, but I don't suggest that. A director of schools, I think, needs to, 3 to 6 or something objectives, because you just can't tackle everything at one time. But you could come up with some things about employee support, whether it is protecting collaboration time, whether it's helping them be more involved in decisions like some of this data shows. It would be a great performance objective on supporting employees. School safety and climate is a great one because, like I said, it's on everybody's mind, and it would include safety, it would include maintenance of all the things that make that learning environment productive. It could be, there could be some things on academics, whether you pick out by graduate time, you want a certain ACT score, or if you want middle school students to be so far in their math curriculum, or if you want so many students when they graduate to be CTE completers or concentrators. I mean, you could go down and pick several things. What I would suggest if you do that is you try to pick some benchmarks at the elementary level, the middle school level, and the high school level. You could argue that if you pick something at the high school level like ACT, they would automatically drive everything up to it, but it really doesn't work that way. Because teachers want to know what it means to me, and principals want to know what they need to work on right now. So I would suggest trying to come up with some academic benchmarks at those 3 levels. So, and then something on parent engagement, obviously, that shows up in here. So you could take those things right there very quickly and outline, some outstanding performance objectives. And I know I tried to talk really fast, and I probably still went too long, and I'm burning up. But do you have any questions, and does this make sense?
It makes very good sense.
I think it's a very well presented, tabulated evaluation.
Thank you.
Here again, it goes beyond the scope of an average point. I speak as for myself. I'm not going to speak for the other board members. But to understand what is truly going on in a system that is this big, unless you're involved on a daily basis and live it and breathe it, we couldn't have got this type of information doing it on our own. And I want to thank you for your diligence and your offer to give us some support moving forward. Board members, you have any questions, comments, concerns?
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, you are pretty special to me, so I try to give you some good information, but I'll be glad to help you any way I can, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know why, and I appreciate you hanging in there, but I do want to thank the board for allowing Dr. Alshai to come back. This stuff's not fun to go through. It's not fun to be scrutinized, but it does truly help me out. It helps out knowing what areas to focus. I'm one person. We're a very small staff. We've got a large school district, a lot of employees, and a lot of students that depend on us each and every day. And I thank the board for allowing him to come in and look as a third party, especially with a couple new board members coming on and looking at what the needs are and what they continue to be in the school system. I have a very clear picture based on what I've learned tonight of what I need to focus on, and I'll be working with all of you as a board and individually as we move forward. But thanks for allowing him to come in. I know it costs, but it is very, very worth it. Can't speak for all of you, but it was very worth it to me, so thank you.
I agree. One quick point. I caught on the news on my phone today that the legislature is debating whether to allow armed teachers. I just wanted to say, is that correct?
As long as they have gone through threat assessment and gun handling training is my understanding, but that is currently up for debate.
Can you keep us posted on that?
I will, yeah.
Any further business before this board?
Motion to adjourn.
We're adjourned.